Sarah Martinez adjusted her grip on the weathered rifle stock as she stepped onto the sprawling military training grounds in Quantico, Virginia. The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert-like terrain, and the familiar weight of her grandfather's hunting rifle felt both comforting and inadequate in her hands. Around her, the elite Navy SEAL training instructors moved with the confident swagger of warriors who had seen combat in the world's most dangerous places. At 26, Sarah had already broken barriers that most people only dreamed of challenging. Growing up on a small ranch in Montana, she had learned to shoot before she could properly tie her shoes. Her grandfather, a Korean War veteran, had taught her that precision wasn't about expensive equipment or fancy modifications. It was about understanding your weapon, reading the environment, and maintaining absolute focus when everything around you demanded chaos. The military had been a natural choice for someone with her skills, but even in the modern armed forces, being a female sniper meant constantly proving herself in a world dominated by men who questioned whether she belonged. Sarah had graduated at the top of her class from sniper school, outperformed her male counterparts in multiple training exercises, and earned the respect of most of her commanding officers. But today was different. Today, she found herself among the Navy SEALs, the most elite fighting force in the American military. The invitation to participate in the joint training exercise had come as a surprise. Cross-service training was becoming more common, and the Army wanted to see how their snipers would perform alongside the Navy's best. Sarah had been selected based on her exceptional marksmanship scores and her ability to perform under pressure. What she hadn't expected was the barely concealed skepticism that greeted her arrival. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, a 15-year SEAL veteran with arms like tree trunks and scars that told stories of countless operations, looked at Sarah's rifle with the kind of expression usually reserved for something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of a boot. The weapon was a modified Remington 700, nothing fancy or high-tech like the custom rifles the SEALs carried. It had belonged to her grandfather, passed down through generations of hunters and soldiers who had learned to make every shot count. "That your primary weapon, soldier?" Thompson asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate answers. Sarah straightened her shoulders and met his gaze directly. "Yes, Chief. It's served me well for the past 8 years." Behind Thompson, several other SEAL snipers exchanged glances that spoke volumes. These men carried rifles worth more than most people's cars, equipped with the latest optics, custom triggers, and precision-machined components that could cost thousands of dollars per modification. To them, Sarah's rifle looked like something a weekend hunter might use to shoot deer, not a weapon suitable for the precision demands of military sniping. Sergeant First Class Jake Morrison, whose pale blue eyes seemed to catalog every detail around him, stepped closer to examine the rifle. He had spent 3 tours in Afghanistan and had confirmed kills at distances that had made him something of a legend among snipers. His own weapon was a Barrett M82A1, a 50 caliber monster that could punch through vehicle armor and still maintain accuracy at extreme ranges. "Interesting choice," Morrison said, his tone carefully neutral, but his meaning clear. "Most of us learn pretty quick that you need the right tools for the job. This isn't deer hunting in Montana." The comment stung because it revealed how much they had already researched her background. They knew exactly where she came from and had clearly decided that rural hunting experience wasn't adequate preparation for military precision shooting. Sarah had heard variations of this dismissal throughout her career, but it never got easier to swallow. Captain Rodriguez, the SEAL team leader overseeing the exercise, called for attention. He was a compact man whose presence commanded instant respect, and his briefing would set the parameters for the next 3 days of competition and training. The exercise was designed to test long-range marksmanship under various conditions, team coordination, and the ability to adapt to changing scenarios. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez began, his voice carrying across the assembled snipers, "you're here because you represent the best marksmen your respective services have to offer. Over the next 72 hours, you'll be tested in ways that simulate real combat conditions. Weather will change, targets will move, and conditions will deteriorate. The sniper, who consistently demonstrates the highest level of skill and adaptability, will be recognized as the overall champion. The stakes were more than just bragging rights. Performance in this exercise would influence future assignments, recommendations for special operations units, and career advancement opportunities. For Sarah, it represented a chance to prove that skill mattered more than equipment or gender. As the group moved toward the first training station, Sarah overheard Morrison talking to another SEAL sniper about the charity case they had been saddled with for the exercise. The words were spoken quietly, but they were clearly intended for her to hear. It was an old tactic designed to get inside an opponent's head and create doubt or anger that would negatively affect performance. Instead of rising to the bait, Sarah focused on checking her equipment and mentally preparing for the challenges ahead. She had learned long ago that the best response to skepticism was results. Words were cheap, but a well-placed shot at 1,000 yards spoke a language that every sniper understood fluently. The first day consisted of standard marksmanship tests at various ranges, starting close and gradually extending the distance. Sarah performed well, consistently grouping her shots within acceptable parameters, but nothing that would silence her critics. The SEAL snipers dominated the longer-range shots, their expensive equipment providing advantages that were difficult to overcome with skill alone. That evening, as the snipers cleaned their weapons and prepared for the next day's challenges, the atmosphere in the temporary barracks was thick with unspoken competition. The SEALs clustered together, sharing war stories and technical discussions about their equipment modifications. Sarah found herself largely isolated, which suited her fine. She had always been more comfortable with her own company anyway. Chief Thompson approached her cleaning station as she methodically disassembled her rifle for maintenance. Up close, she could see that despite his skeptical attitude, he was genuinely curious about her weapon and her techniques. "Mind if I ask where you learned to shoot like that?" he said, settling onto a nearby bench. "My grandfather started teaching me when I was 7, Sarah replied, not looking up from her cleaning. "He always said that a rifle is only as good as the person behind it." Thompson nodded slowly. "Smart man. But you've got to admit, equipment matters. Especially when you're talking about extreme range shooting. Physics doesn't care about tradition." Sarah looked up at him then, recognizing that despite his earlier dismissiveness, he was offering something approaching respect. "You're absolutely right, Chief. Equipment matters, but it's not everything. My grandfather used this same rifle to make shots in Korea that saved his squad multiple times. It may not look like much, but it's never let me down." The conversation was interrupted by Morrison and 2 other SEALs, who had finished their own weapon maintenance. Morrison's expression suggested he had been listening to their exchange with growing irritation. "Look, I'm sure your grandfather was a hell of a soldier," Morrison said, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "But this isn't 1950, and we're not fighting the Chinese army with World War II surplus equipment. Modern warfare requires modern solutions." Sarah felt the familiar surge of anger that came whenever someone dismissed her family's military heritage, but she forced herself to remain calm. Losing her temper would only confirm their suspicions that she didn't belong among elite snipers. "Tomorrow's forecast is calling for high winds and variable conditions," Thompson said, apparently trying to diffuse the tension. "Should be interesting to see how everyone adapts." As the group dispersed to their bunks, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring challenges beyond just difficult weather conditions. The second day dawned with the kind of weather that made veteran snipers nervous. Crosswinds gusted unpredictably across the training range, shifting direction every few minutes and varying in intensity from gentle breezes to strong gusts that could push a bullet several feet off target at long range. The morning fog hung low over the desert floor, creating visibility challenges that would test every sniper's ability to read environmental conditions. Sarah stood at the firing line, studying the mirage patterns through her scope as she calculated wind speed and direction. Around her, the SEAL snipers were making similar observations, but their conversations revealed a level of confidence that bordered on arrogance. They had trained in conditions far worse than this, and their expensive wind meters and ballistic computers gave them precise data that took much of the guesswork out of long-range shooting. The day's first challenge involved engaging targets at progressively longer ranges, starting at 800 yards and extending to 1,500 yards. Each sniper would have 3 shots at each distance, with scoring based on accuracy and consistency. It was exactly the kind of test where superior equipment would provide significant advantages. Morrison stepped up to the firing line first, his massive Barrett rifle looking like a piece of artillery compared to the other weapons. He went through his shooting routine with mechanical precision, checking his ballistic computer, adjusting his scope settings, and settling into a shooting position that spoke of countless hours of practice. His first shot rang out across the desert, and the spotter confirmed a hit dead center on the 800-yard target. The pattern continued as each SEAL sniper took their turn. Their shots were consistently accurate, their equipment compensating for the challenging conditions with digital precision. When Sarah's turn came, she could feel the weight of their expectations. They were waiting for her to fail, for her grandfather's old rifle to prove inadequate against modern technology. Sarah settled behind her rifle and began her own preparation routine. Without the benefit of electronic wind meters or ballistic computers, she relied on techniques her grandfather had taught her decades earlier. She watched the grass patterns in the distance, observed how the mirage waves bent in her scope, and felt the wind on her cheek to gauge direction and strength. Her first shot struck the target slightly left of center, still well within the acceptable scoring zone, but not the perfect hit that Morrison had achieved. She could hear quiet comments from the SEAL observers, confirming what they already believed about her equipment limitations. As the distances increased, the gap between Sarah's performance and the SEAL's became more pronounced. At 1,200 yards, Morrison and Thompson were still placing shots within inches of the target center, while Sarah's groups opened up to several inches. It wasn't poor shooting by any standard. But in a competition where precision was measured in fractions of inches, every small advantage mattered. By mid-afternoon, the wind had intensified to the point where even the SEAL snipers were struggling to maintain their earlier accuracy. Captain Rodriguez gathered the group for a special challenge that hadn't been part of the original training schedule. Given the conditions we're dealing with today, we're going to attempt something that pushes the boundaries of what's considered possible, Rodriguez announced. We've set up a special target at 2 miles out. That's 3,520 yards, which is beyond the effective range of most of your weapons. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. 2 miles was an extraordinary distance for any sniper shot, requiring not just exceptional marksmanship, but also perfect environmental reading and a considerable amount of luck. Even with the most advanced equipment, such shots were more about mathematical possibility than practical application. Each sniper will have one attempt, Rodriguez continued. This isn't about scoring or competition. It's about pushing your limits and understanding the extreme edge of what's possible with long-range precision shooting. Morrison was practically salivating at the opportunity. His .50 caliber Barrett was one of the few rifles present that had any realistic chance of reaching the target with enough energy to register a hit. He spent nearly 30 minutes preparing for his shot, consulting his ballistic computer multiple times and making minute adjustments to his scope settings. When he finally fired, the massive rifle's report echoed across the desert like thunder. Several seconds passed before the spotter's radio crackled with confirmation that the shot had fallen short by approximately 50 yards. It was an impressive attempt given the distance, but the target remained untouched. Thompson tried next with similar results. His shot came closer, but still fell short of the target. Each subsequent SEAL sniper attempted the shot with their respective rifles, and while all came reasonably close to the target area, none managed to make contact with the actual target. Finally, it was Sarah's turn. She could see the skepticism in every face around her. If the SEALs with their advanced equipment and .50 caliber rifles couldn't make the shot, what chance did she have with her grandfather's old hunting rifle? Sarah approached the firing line with deliberate calmness, even though her heart was racing. 2 miles was beyond anything she had ever attempted, beyond anything her rifle was designed to handle under normal circumstances. But as she settled into her shooting position, she remembered something her grandfather had told her years earlier about the difference between possible and impossible. She spent longer than usual studying the conditions, watching wind patterns at multiple points along the bullet's projected path. The afternoon sun was creating complex mirage patterns that made accurate range estimation nearly impossible with conventional methods. Instead of fighting these conditions, Sarah began looking for ways to use them to her advantage. The key insight came when she realized that the shifting wind patterns weren't random. They followed a predictable cycle based on the terrain features and thermal heating patterns. If she could time her shot to coincide with the right point in that cycle, she might be able to use the wind to help carry her bullet the extra distance it needed. Sarah made her calculations without electronic assistance, relying instead on mental math and instinctive understanding of ballistics that had been refined through years of practical shooting experience. She adjusted her scope to maximum elevation and chose a point of aim that seemed impossibly high to observers who didn't understand what she was attempting. The desert fell silent as Sarah controlled her breathing and began her final shooting sequence. Through her scope, the target was barely visible as a tiny speck against the distant hillside. At this range, even the slightest error in judgment would result in a complete miss. Sarah's finger found the trigger and began applying steady pressure. Everything around her faded away except the rhythm of her heartbeat and the subtle movement of the crosshairs in her scope. When the rifle fired, the report seemed almost anticlimactic after the massive booms of the Barrett rifles. The bullet's flight time to a target 2 miles away is nearly 4 seconds, an eternity in the world of precision shooting. During those 4 seconds, everyone on the firing line remained frozen, waiting for confirmation from the spotters positioned near the target. The radio remained silent for what felt like minutes before finally crackling to life. The spotter's voice carried a note of disbelief that was audible even through the static-filled transmission. Confirm hit on target. Repeat. We have a confirmed hit on the 2-mile target. The silence that followed the spotter's confirmation stretched across the firing line like a physical presence. For several heartbeats, nobody moved or spoke, as if the collective disbelief had frozen everyone in place. Morrison's expression shifted from confident superiority to something approaching confusion, while Thompson stood staring downrange through his binoculars as though he could somehow verify the impossible shot with his own eyes. Captain Rodriguez was the first to break the spell, speaking into his radio to request additional confirmation from the target spotters. The response came back immediately and definitively. Not only had Sarah's bullet struck the target, but it had hit within the center scoring ring, indicating a level of precision that defied statistical probability. Sarah herself remained motionless behind her rifle, still processing what had just happened. She had felt the shot break cleanly, knew her hold had been steady, and sensed that her timing with the wind cycle had been perfect. But knowing you've executed a shot well and actually hitting a target 2 miles away were entirely different things. Even she hadn't truly expected to make contact with the target. Morrison was the first to approach her position, his earlier antagonism replaced by grudging bewilderment. As a sniper who prided himself on understanding the technical limits of long-range shooting, Sarah's success challenged everything he thought he knew about equipment requirements and ballistic capabilities. "How?" Morrison asked simply, gesturing toward her rifle as if it had somehow transformed into something he didn't recognize. Sarah began the process of clearing her weapon, her movements automatic, even though her mind was still catching up to what had occurred. "Same way you make any long shot," she replied quietly. "Read the conditions, make the calculations, and squeeze the trigger." But even as she said it, Sarah knew the explanation was inadequate. Making a shot at 2 miles required more than just good technique and favorable conditions. It required an almost mystical convergence of factors that couldn't be reliably repeated or easily explained to others. Thompson approached with his own Barrett rifle, comparing the specifications of his .50 caliber weapon to Sarah's much smaller caliber hunting rifle. On paper, his rifle should have been superior in every measurable way. It fired a larger, heavier bullet at higher velocity, had been specifically designed for extreme long-range shooting, and was equipped with the most advanced optics available. "I don't understand the physics of what just happened," Thompson admitted, his tone carrying none of the condescension that had characterized his earlier interactions with Sarah. "Your bullet shouldn't have had enough energy left to penetrate the target at that distance. even if it somehow managed to reach it. Chief Rodriguez returned from his radio communications with confirmation that the shot had been independently verified by multiple observers. The bullet hole in the target was being photographed and measured to provide official documentation of what was already being called one of the longest confirmed sniper shots in military training history. The implications of Sarah's achievement extended far beyond the immediate training exercise. In military circles, exceptional marksmanship was revered, almost like magic, and a shot like this would become part of sniper folklore. Stories would spread through the special operations community, growing in the telling until the achievement reached legendary status. More immediately, the dynamic among the training group had shifted completely. The SEAL snipers who had spent 2 days treating Sarah like an unwelcome outsider now regarded her with the kind of respect usually reserved for combat veterans with confirmed enemy kills. They understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary, something that challenged their assumptions about what was possible with basic equipment and exceptional skill. As word of the shot spread throughout the base, other instructors and training personnel began arriving at the firing line to hear first-hand accounts of what had happened. Sarah found herself uncomfortably thrust into the center of attention, fielding questions about her technique, her rifle modifications, and her training background. The questions revealed how little the military community understood about traditional marksmanship skills that had been largely replaced by technological solutions. Sarah's approach to reading wind patterns through environmental observation rather than electronic measurement seemed almost primitive to snipers accustomed to digital ballistic calculators and precision weather stations. But the results spoke for themselves. While the SEAL snipers had relied on their sophisticated equipment to get close to the target, Sarah had used traditional fieldcraft and intuitive understanding of ballistics to achieve what none of them could match with their advanced technology. Morrison approached Sarah again as the crowd of curious onlookers began to disperse. His earlier hostility had been replaced by genuine professional curiosity, and what might have been the beginning of respect. "I owe you an apology," Morrison said simply. "I made assumptions about your capabilities based on your equipment, and I was wrong." Thompson nodded his agreement. "We all did. It's not easy admitting when you've been schooled. But that shot was something special." Captain Rodriguez gathered the group for a final debrief as the day's training concluded. The original competition had become almost meaningless in light of Sarah's extraordinary achievement, but he still wanted to address what everyone had learned from the experience. "Today demonstrated something that we sometimes forget in our focus on technological advancement," Rodriguez began. "Equipment matters, absolutely. But the human element remains the most critical factor in precision shooting. Sergeant Martinez reminded us that fundamental marksmanship skills, properly applied, can overcome significant equipment disadvantages." The captain's words carried weight because they came from someone who had spent years in special operations and understood the balance between technology and skill. His endorsement of Sarah's achievement would ensure that the lesson wasn't dismissed as a lucky accident or statistical anomaly. That evening, as the snipers prepared their equipment for the final day of training, the atmosphere was markedly different from the previous nights. Sarah found herself included in conversations that had previously excluded her, with SEAL snipers genuinely interested in learning about her techniques and training methods. The final day of exercises proceeded almost as an anticlimax after the previous day's drama. Sarah continued to perform well in the standard marksmanship tests, but everyone understood that the real competition had already been decided. Her 2-mile shot had established a benchmark that would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. When the exercise concluded, Captain Rodriguez announced that Sergeant Sarah Martinez had achieved the highest overall performance rating, based not just on her extraordinary long-range shot, but also on her consistent accuracy throughout all phases of training. The recognition came with recommendations for advanced training opportunities and consideration for special operations assignments. But perhaps more importantly, Sarah had earned something that couldn't be measured or officially documented: the genuine respect of the Navy SEAL sniper community. Morrison and Thompson both approached her with offers to stay in touch and share training techniques, acknowledging that they had learned valuable lessons about the relationship between technology and fundamental marksmanship skills. As Sarah packed her grandfather's rifle for the journey home, she reflected on how the weapon had once again proved its worth in the hands of someone who understood its capabilities. The rifle hadn't changed, but the perception of what was possible with traditional equipment and exceptional skill had been forever altered. The story of the Army sergeant who silenced the Navy SEALs with her grandfather's hunting rifle would spread throughout military sniper circles, becoming the kind of legend that inspired young marksmen to focus on mastering fundamentals rather than relying solely on technological advantages. For Sarah, the achievement represented validation of everything her grandfather had taught her about precision shooting. Sometimes the old ways weren't just adequate. They were superior to modern alternatives when applied with wisdom and skill that couldn't be purchased or programmed into a computer.